Well, hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this Wednesday study as we're going through the book of Joshua, chapter 23, kind of nearing the end of Joshua, the book of Joshua. And so much has happened in these years that Joshua has led the children of Israel. And so as we get to chapter 23 and then finish up in chapter 24, Joshua knows that his time is nearing an end. And like any good leader, any good father to children, he wants to impart last words. He wants to leave um, something for them. And there's a Jewish saying that is always mentioned when you remember someone who's passed, and what you want to have remembered there for them is that may their memory be a blessing. May their memory be for a blessing. And I think that probably takes its root from this here, that um, Joshua wants his name to be a blessing as a memory. And so as we look at verse 1, it says, after a long time had passed, the Lord had given Israel rest from all their enemies around them, and Joshua by then was a very old man. He summoned all the leaders, the judges, the officials, the elders, and said to them, I'm very old. It kind of makes you laugh, kind of Captain Obvious here, but just re-emphasizing. And you yourselves have seen everything that the Lord your God has done to all these nations for your sake. It was the Lord your God who fought for you. Again, this is just a beautiful view that um, reminds us that our lives are not our own, and that even though Israelites had armies and they fought battles, um, it was the Lord their God that was fighting for them. And I just feel a little pricking here in my spirit that this is something I need to remember, that no matter what we go through, there is a God who's in control. There is a God who's watching over everything. And so verse 4, he says, remember how I've allotted an inheritance for your tribes in all the land of the nations that remain, the nations I conquered between the Jordan and Mediterranean in the west. So I just want to take a map again here and take a look at the basically the three campaigns of battles of war that Joshua had. The first one was from Shittim, going across into the west, and then from there they went down to the south for where is now Judah, the southern campaign, and then finally the northern campaign that took them and finally finished this conquest. Everything was on the west side of the Jordan River. The east side of the Jordan, there seemingly wasn't a lot to accomplish there, and that's where two of the tribes and the people waited for the conquest to occur. And while their men went and fought on the west side, the women and children stayed on the east side for these two tribes. So very interesting. And then finally here, the division of the property you see on the map of the Gad, Reuben on the east side of Jordan, and then Manasseh on the west, on the east side, but then split in half. And so this is the finality of it, division of the land. So as Joshua is giving the last his last words, he says, things still aren't completely done. Verse 5, the Lord your God himself will push them out for your sake. He will drive them out before you. You will take possession of the land. But again, here he had to admonish them to be strong, to be careful to obey all that is written in the book of the law of Moses, and don't deviate from it, signified by the phrase turning aside to the right or to the left. And some very strong admonition here in verse 7, don't associate with these nations that remain among them. And here was the details of it. Don't invoke the names of their gods or make any oaths swearing by them. You must not serve them or bow down to them. You kind of see a progression here that he's warning them that if you don't invoke the names, well, you won't be making any promises by them, and then you surely won't be serving them or bowing down. But if you start with the small thing of invoking their name, now it's going to be a part of your language, and it may cause you to make an oath by them. And then that may then lead you to serve them and bow down to them. So you kind of see a progression of a downhill um, slide, if you will, of into idolatry. And of course, we know that as we'll find out when we go into the book of Judges later, um, his admonition was not taken to heart by the Israelites. Verse 8 is really neat. It says, "But you are to hold fast." But this word hold fast in some English translations is translated as cleave. The Hebrew word there is really in modern Hebrew, it's used for the word for glue. So if you were to go and, we have Elmer's glue, well, their name for Elmer's is devak, which is cleave or hold fast. So it's kind of interesting how modern Hebrew has sort of backed up the meaning here, that they understood that you are to glue yourself to the Lord your God, super glue yourself to the Lord your God as you have until now. Again, a pretty interesting word picture there. Verse 9, the Lord has driven out before you great and powerful nations to this day, and no one has been able to withstand you. Then we go to uh, two verses that take a little bit more of our need for notice here. Verse 10 talks about the um, difference in the battle size, the army size, that one would rout 1,000 because the Lord your God fights for you just as he has promised. And you'll find this little cliche throughout many of other pieces of scripture in the Psalms, that one would put 1,000 to flight, two would put 10,000. It shows that God's math doesn't always fit our math to make a nice bell curve and plot it out as to how things would exponentially grow. His math is much greater in growth than what ours is, and just showing how his power is so much beyond anything that we can think about or even calculate. But verse 11, I needed to show a little bit of Hebrew here, because it's while it's still powerful, it says, so be very careful to love the Lord your God. The Hebrew takes it to a different level. And so I've kind of inserted the Hebrew for verse 11. It reads from right to left, and it Venicium Martem, take heed, and then uses the word meod. Now, meod is translated as careful, but it's really the word for very, or sometimes much. And the word called take heed is really the word for guarding. It's shamer, to guard. And so he's just saying guard very is really the literal interpretation of it. Guard very. But then the next word, Venash Tekem, is for your soul. It's your nephesh. You may have heard that word before. One of the first Hebrew words many people learn is your nephesh, is your soul. So he's really saying, guard very your soul. Now, it makes no sense in English, which is why the translators add these other words, but you get the impact, you get the force. Guard very your soul. He's admonishing them how diligently we have to guard our soul in a very impactful way, that we would love the Lord your God. And it uses the word Yahweh here, the tetragrammaton, which emphasizes the nurturing, compassionate, uh, caring side of God. Um, so that's very beautiful. And in verse 12, he gives the counter side of that. If you turn away and ally yourselves with these nations, you ally them, you begin to intermarry with them, you associate with them, it will take you into idolatry. It will take you into a place of compromise that you won't be able to come back from. And then verse 13 has some really incredible words to them. It says, then you may be sure that the Lord your God will no longer drive out these nations before you. Instead, they will become snares and traps for you, whips on your back, thorns in your eyes, until you perish from this good land which the Lord your God has given you. Again, I hope you don't mind taking a little side trip, but I wanted to show you what the Hebrew says, because it just adds just such a greater richness to it. Um, if you look at the words kind of where my cursor is going, it says, "To you these will be snares and traps and scourges on your side and thorns in your eye." It's just like boom, boom, boom. There'll be snares and traps and scourges on your side and thorns in your eyes. And I was looking at this, trying to understand the imagery because they're very strong, snares and traps, things that would take you away when you maybe weren't aware of it, that you get caught in these things when you weren't looking. But then looking at the scourges on your side, most of the translations will say on your back, whips on your back, but this is the word side. And it's the word scourging and thorns in your eyes. And I don't know that I've ever heard anybody make this connection, but I couldn't help but think of the crucifixion scene of the road to Golgotha, to Calvary, where Jesus was being led. Um, he took all of our punishment and bore the pain of all the things that we were supposed to be punished with. Could it be that Joshua laid this out in such a way that this was the punishment that would have come upon Israel, but yet here we see Jesus taking a form of it. He was tricked by the religious leaders, snares. Many times it said they tried to trap him. They tried to snare him in his words, is the word used in the New Testament. But I think interesting here is he was scourged and his side was pierced. He was scourged on his back by the Roman soldiers. His side was pierced. He had a crown of thorns on his head. No doubt it dislodged and entered into his eyes in some way. So I just saw this as Jesus taking this punishment that was meant and predicted for Israel, and he I believe, fulfilled every one of these things by taking our punishment for the things that we have done. This moved me quite intensely, and just incredible to bring that symmetry there and bring that connection, which I had never really seen before until I looked at the Hebrew and that thought went through my mind. And then finally, we come to Joshua saying in verse 14, "I'm about to go the way of all the earth." Again, kind of an interesting little cliche, um, with the understanding that he's about to die, with all your heart and soul, that God has kept all his promises, all his good promises. God has given you, none have failed, everyone has been fulfilled. But just as the Lord has promised you, he will bring on these evil things which he has threatened until the Lord your God has destroyed you from this land he has given you. Now, what struck me here is noticing that the people were not going to be destroyed. They were going to be taken from this good land. Their involvement in this good land would be destroyed. And there in verse 16, it's reiterated again that if you violate the covenant and serve other gods and bow down to them, you will quickly perish from the land that the Lord your God has given you. It doesn't say the people will perish off the earth. It just says they will be taken from the good land. They will perish from the good land, destroyed from the good land. And this was fulfilled with Israel being um, uh, driven from the promised land and scattered to the ends of the earth, but yet Israel was not destroyed. The people were not destroyed because that was God's promise that he would betroth himself or marry himself to them and would always watch over them, and then again would bring them back into the land, which was accomplished in 1948 when Israel, the land of Israel, was recreated or was created, and the Israel was brought back, and the Jewish people were brought back to the land of Israel. So again, beautiful imagery, beautiful stories, beautiful promises that were given, and interesting and beautiful just to see how God has fulfilled this, and that his promises never fail. So thank you so much for joining this little session here today. I pray God's blessings will be upon you and look forward to seeing you again next week. Take care. Bye-bye.